Welcome back to Intro to Tech Skills right here at Microsoft Build. You can see we have our map here on screen, and we're on day 2. We've been diving into more technical sessions, and now it's time to dive into something a little bit more career focused. Salman, what do we have up next?
Exactly, Gwen. We have an amazing session which not only people would find interesting if they're starting out in their career, perhaps later on in their career too, and that is tackling the technical interview. We also have a session later on building your resume, so I think going to both of these sessions are going to be...
That's a combo.
Exactly, exactly. Took the words right out of my mouth, Ben. And hey, we have Orko, who's a software engineering manager at Microsoft, and also Sophia, who's a software engineer at Microsoft. They both have had loads of experience interviewing people, whether it be interns, full-time people, for both the roles software engineers and PMs, product managers or program managers at Microsoft. So hey, you're going to want to take notes throughout these sessions, and we have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. Just before we go off, I just want to remind people, check out the AI gaming activity, the Minecraft Time Machine activity, and the Cloud Skills Challenge.
Absolutely. Now, I'm very excited for this session, and it's now time to welcome and hand off to our first speaker for the session, Sophia.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm really excited to be here speaking with you, with my colleague Orko, all about how to tackle technical interviews. Now, let's go through a quick rundown of what we're going to be covering in this session. We're going to start off talking about the why and what of technical interviews. Why do they exist and what do they look like? Then Orko and I are going to share some of our own experiences in the past with technical interviews. Next, we're going to dive into a live walkthrough of an interview. So I'm going to go ahead and give Orko a technical interview, and we'll talk through good things to do in technical interviews, things to avoid, and general takeaways that we will take with us into the closing. So with that map in mind, let's dive into the first part, which is why technical interviews. They can definitely be very anxiety-inducing, but they provide a lot of value to both the company that's interviewing you and yourself. So first and foremost, they're a great way for the company to understand your strengths and weaknesses as an engineer. And that will relay into determining what level you should be placed at. Hey, are you someone who's just starting off in their career and is showing a lot of potential and would be best suited for a junior position? Or do you have a lot of expertise, great collaboration skills, and can provide mentorship, in which case you might be a little bit more senior? So this ability to level you makes sure that the company can place you in a place or a position where you're most likely to succeed. And last but not least, it's about evaluating fit, not just for the company trying to figure out where you fit in, on what team, or in what position and level, but also for you to determine if the company is a good fit for you based on your own experiences during the interview. So it's always a two-way street. You're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. Now, when it comes to what actually is in the technical interview, I'm going to have my colleague Orko share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. So of course, in a technical interview, you will have that technical portion of it where you'll be coding quite a bit with the interviewer. But it also will have other non-technical competencies that folks will be looking for, right? Your ability to collaborate with others, how well you're communicating your ideas, are you asking the right questions, are you listening for the prompts from the interviewer, and finally, how well you're working towards solving that problem. Are you focusing on the goal and trying to achieve it? And all of these things, really, we're also going to be looking out for during the technical portion itself. So it's not just about sitting there and churning out a bunch of code. It's actually about working with your interviewer, bringing them along for the ride. Coding is, or software engineering is a team sport. We don't, code in a vacuum. So it is very important that we showcase our communication skills, our collaboration skills throughout the process. So with that, I think we'll start off just by sharing a little bit of our own experiences with interviewing. I haven't been on the interviewing side of things for about 5 or 6 years now, since I've been here at Microsoft for that period. I mostly see things from the hiring manager perspective nowadays, but I can kind of go back to relate to my interview experience as it was 6 years ago. I remember my first ever interview with Microsoft. It was going terribly because the problem itself did not click in my mind. But what I kept trying to do was I kept trying to solve it. I kept trying to come up with ideas and talking to the interviewer. Eventually, they kind of mentioned that, hey, even though you did not solve the problem or finish coding, you were on the right track. You did come across a proper solution. And I did fairly well on the other ones, and eventually I was hired. So the key takeaways for me from that experience was that, it's okay, first of all, that one of those interviews could go a little sideways. That's why we have multiple interviews per interviewee. And also, it's okay for you to not necessarily come up with a solution right away, even if you are sort of the process is the part that really matters. Safia, would you like to share yours?
Yeah, those are great lessons, and they certainly resonate with me. I interviewed at Microsoft in winter of 2018, and it was actually my first time interviewing with a big tech company. I had never done that before, and I was so overwhelmed and anxious about the whole thing. So what I did is I spent the 6 weeks before my interview doing lots of programming problems. I had a little notebook. I think I have it with me right here, where I would find programming problems online on LeetCode, Geeks for Geeks, a whole variety of websites, and I would write solutions to them in my notebook. And I would actually talk out loud while I was writing these solutions, pretending that there was somebody else in the room or next to me on the train, or wherever I was at that point, to kind of practice that whole collaboration, speaking through others. And I think what was really valuable for me is that practice built confidence, and confidence and kind of self-assuredness is the most important thing you can go into when going into your technical interview. So practice, 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 build that confidence. And, of course, for me, it worked because here I am today. I've been a software engineer at Microsoft for a little over 3 years. So all that practice paid off in the end. Speaking of practice, I hope you've been practicing, Orko, because I hear that you are interested in a position on my team. And I would love to give you a little technical interview just to see where your skills are at and where you would best fit in. So I've actually sent you a link to a Codility page, which is the online platform we use for giving technical interviews remotely. Can you pop open that link and show me if you got it?
Yep, opening it up right now.
Great.
Thank you, Safia.
Awesome.
I've heard really good things about your team, so I'm very excited at the opportunity to interview with you.
Yeah, and I look forward to interviewing you as well. I've already got the problem that we're going to be working through on the left here. So given an array of n-1 elements that contains only integers in the range of 1 to n, can you find the missing number?
Great, thank you, Safia. So just looking through this problem, I have a few questions in mind that will hopefully you'll be able to give me some information about.
Yeah,
first
sure.
First question I had was, are the numbers all distinct? Are they distinct integers?
Yeah, great question. They are all distinct integers. There are no duplicates of this array.
And great. And am I expecting them to be ordered, or could they be in any order?
No, there is no ordering in this array. So they can be out of order, they can be in order. No ordering is guaranteed.
Gotcha. Okay. And finally, how big is n expected to be?
Okay, interesting question. N can be potentially infinitely large. There is no limit on how big the number n can be. Great.
Okay.
I am loving that you are asking all of these questions, Orko. It's showing me as an interviewer that you take the time to pause and think about a problem before diving into the solution. And the questions that you're asking show me that you think a lot about the inputs that you might be getting to your program and how that might affect the behavior or implementation that you write. So far, so good. You're showing a lot of promise as a candidate.
Thank you, Safia. And yeah, these questions really help me kind of, first of all, helps me ease my nerves a little bit before I start coding right away. It also, explains the nuances of the problem to make sure that I'm not missing any gotchas that are there. Often these problems are not necessarily just immediately as what it seems. And finally, thank you for answering these questions. It helps me formulate the plan that I have in mind. So I actually, based on your answers and sort of thinking about it, I do have some pseudocode in mind that I might just start off with sharing, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm excited to see what you're thinking of.
So off the bat, I think that the solution that comes to my mind, how I would do it if I was just looking through the numbers, would be I would essentially go through each number and check if that particular number is in an array of all the numbers that I'm expecting, right? So that's kind of what my pseudocode is. It might not be the most optimal solution immediately, but I figured that's a starting point for me. So here I'm just putting them in here. My first step would be to create an array of 1 to n numbers, which I expect to be there. And then for each number in that array, I would check if that particular number is in the input that you have given me. And if that number is not in the input, well, that's my missing number.
Got it. I see. So you're thinking of essentially comparing the incomplete array that we get as input against a complete array to evaluate what the missing number might be.
Yes.
That sounds like a pretty solid strategy to start. Do you want to take a stab at writing an implementation for this?
Yeah. Now I was going to ask you. I thought so. I have the language chosen as C# right now because I figured I'm at Microsoft and probably a lot of Microsoft developers I know code in C#. But is that the language that I need to code it in?
Absolutely not. For this technical interview, you can pick whatever programming language you are comfortable in, and I will work with you to make sure that I understand the syntax. I'll ask any questions if you write something in a language I'm unfamiliar with, but the most important thing is pick whatever language you're comfortable with.
Awesome. That is super great to hear. I think for most recently, I've been working in Java, so I think I'll move to Java for this code.
Yeah, you know what? I'm familiar with Java.
Awesome. And I appreciate the flexibility that's there in the interview process.
Perfect. I'm glad you do. All right, I'm excited to see this implementation.
So I am at build right now, and so build always gets the best coding out of me. So I already have a solution that I'm just going to paste it in here a little bit faster than you normally would. I am going to break the fourth wall here just to let the audience know that in real life, please don't copy and paste code out into your interview. That's probably not going to be looked upon well by your interviewer. But just for the sake of this demo, we're kind of pushing things along a little fast.
Yes, this is definitely magic of television going on right here. In a real interview, we would actually go through and write all of this code together ourselves. But you've impressed me with your amazing copy-paste skills in this television demo.
Which is a big skill to have as a developer. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, would you like me to walk you through my solution?
Yeah, yes, I'd love that. Let's go through this implementation.
Okay, so first of all, I have this one method, and actually I should make this private because I'm not going to be using it outside. But this is the initial method which I'm using to create an array of that n numbers, the expected solution space. And then what I'm doing with that array is that this is my big method, which is going to actually find the missing number. In there, I first construct the array, and then I loop through with a couple of nested for loops. I loop through the numbers and try to find the particular number that's missing.
I see. Okay. This seems like a pretty solid implementation. It at least does what your pseudocode intended to do. Is there anything we can do to validate that this actually works?
Yeah, so I have this. I think the next step in my development process would be to write a few test cases out. So I have written one initial test case out that I might be able to run, and hopefully we'll see the right number being output.
Yeah, let's give it a go. So you've got an array here that looks like it's missing the number 5. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the number that's missing, and hopefully my program now spits out 5.
All right, fingers crossed.
All right.
All right, so far so good.
Yeah.
So, Orko, one of the things I'm noticing is that, you take this array as input to your method. What are the different kinds of values that might be passed into the find missing number method? And might any of them be values that we don't expect?
Yeah, so I think I think I know exactly what you're kind of talking about there. I do believe that sometimes due to some issues from the caller, there might be a null array that's passed in, or maybe the input array does not have any numbers in it. So I think we should probably have some code here that saves us from the implementation from exploding when any of those
Yeah.
situations occur.
Yep. It definitely always helps to be a little bit defensive in your programming against those kinds of bad inputs you might get. So, how are you thinking you might tackle any bad inputs your method will get?
So there are two ways that kind of comes in mind right now that I could tackle this. One is that maybe for invalid inputs, I could send out like a negative number or something that's kind of invalid, not expected.
Okay.
Or perhaps the other option is for me to actually throw an exception if a particular if the input itself is not valid. Any preference over one or the other?
Yeah. Well, I think throwing an exception might be the better choice here. I can imagine that it might be a little bit confusing if our method returns -1. Someone might think that -1 is the missing number or something to that effect. So exceptions are always a great way to communicate, hey, you did something wrong here.
That's true. Yep. I agree. I think that's what we should do. The exception basically tells the caller also exactly what the issue is, and they can go in and fix it. So here's the exception that I would like to throw. Adding the code in right now. If the input array is null or the input array length is 0, it should throw an illegal argument exception. I can write a couple additional test cases to make that show that works.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start off with just putting in null here. And if I run the code, yep, it looks like I'm getting the exception. Yeah. And then if I also if I remove my input, it's actually simulating the case where the input is empty.
Okay, there it is again. And our base scenario still works with the input containing all the numbers we expect, excluding the missing one. So, Orko, I'm noticing something about your find missing number API here. So you've got this method that takes two values, an array and the expected number of elements in the array. Is there any way we could simplify this API?
Yeah, actually, that's right. And actually, in fact, I think by having that n value input there, I am actually inviting some error to be done by the user, because I can easily figure out what the length of this input would be. But if I have it being taken separately, the user might incorrectly, they might pass in an array with 6 numbers and expect it to be 7, but then they call it with like the n value being 10. And then I would have to verify that, and that might lead to out of bound exceptions and all that sorts of stuff. So yeah, I could change that. I could try and compute this out myself. So right after doing the check, I could do n value equals input array dot length plus 1.
Okay.
And that lets me get rid of this value. I should also get rid of it here. And yes, now I am organically kind of figuring out the input length and what the n should be instead of relying on the user.
Yeah, I like this approach. We've got one less parameter as an input to our method, and obviously a smaller surface area for bugs now that we're not taking that input. So, Orko, I'm feeling pretty good about where we're at with this implementation with regard to its accuracy. We've tested it out on valid input, invalid input. I want to go back and talk a little bit about the kind of performance or optimality of this implementation. First of all, can you share what the time complexity of the implementation you have here is?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is where I think my implementation kind of falls apart a bit. I do, as you can see, I have a couple of for loops, one nested inside the other. So I'm going through n numbers, and then for each number, I'm going through n more. So at this point, the time complexity for my solution is O of n squared.
Okay. That's not ideal. And I think you kind of knew that because you'd mentioned that this is the brute force or first idea that you were considering. Do you have in mind a more optimal solution for this problem, or can you think of something that we could do to improve the performance here?
So I think, in this sort of a situation, I would at least have to go through all the numbers once, at least once. So I think in that scenario, probably the best I could do is O of n.
Okay.
And I do have a solution that kind of comes to mind right now that we would be able to use.
Yeah.
An O of n solution would involve perhaps, I know that the sum of all numbers would be missing that particular element if I summed the numbers that I have been given. So if I subtracted, if I already knew the value of n, I could compute the sum of n, first n numbers, and then subtract my input from that, and that should give me that missing number.
I see. So we're going to kind of take out one of the loops and replace it instead with a static computation that will determine, given an n, the sum of all numbers below that n, including the n. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's the idea behind the solution.
All right. That sounds like an interesting approach. I can definitely see how it can improve our performance here. And I do agree with your assessment that probably the best time complexity we're going to get here is around O of n. So yeah, can you show me what an implementation or the more optimal implementation would look like?
Yep. So I will, again, through the powers of build, here I have the better coding solution.
Yeah.
Excuse the slight indentation issue here.
It's okay.
So this code right here is my find missing number using sum. As you can see here, right near the top, I am figuring out, I still have my error handling scenario because that still holds. I still want to make sure that my input array is not null or empty. But after that, I figure out the sum total that I'm expecting, which is through this little neat math trick that I know that it's n times n plus 1 by 2. And then after that, I go through each of the numbers and calculate this. Actually, I subtract that amount from my existing sum, and then whatever I'm left with is the number that I'm missing.
Okay. Seeing the implementation definitely helps me understand the code a lot more. Can we verify that this works as we expect it to, just to check that this is working correctly?
Exactly. So let's do that. And find missing number using sum. If I run this code, hopefully it still gives me the right output. And yay.
All right.
I would like to add one more test case. I know you mentioned initially that the numbers are not going to be in order, and my test case is in order. So I think that's another test case that I probably should check for. So why don't I just do that?
Great memory. Let's try that out. Yeah.
Let's scramble these up a little, and hopefully this still works.
All right, so we should still expect 5 here, even though the array is not in order. Nice.
All right.
All right, that was a pretty good check so far. And as you mentioned earlier, we've got this implementation that is now O of N compared to our previous one, which was O of N squared. Right. Well, Orko, it looks like we've got just 5 minutes left in our interview. I want to take the time to say that you've done a lot of really great things in this interview. You started off by asking questions right away about the problem instead of just diving in and starting to code. Throughout the interview, you were really open to feedback and questions from myself, and you even asked a few. And I felt like you're someone that I could really see myself working with on a day-to-day basis. It was really great. And I really feel like you had the opportunity to showcase your best self throughout this interview. Before we sign off for this call, do you have any questions for me about the team, the position, or Microsoft in general?
Yeah, and thank you, Sophia, for this great interview experience. I do have a question. I would like to learn a bit more about your team. In particular, one thing that I was thinking, what I had in mind is that I am gonna be remote, as you know, that as you know, through my application, that I would be working as a remote engineer. So I was just wondering, with sort of the hybrid workspace now that's happening, some folks are coming back to office, some folks are not. What is your team actually doing to make sure that we are still being inclusive and everybody is getting their voices heard, even if they're remote?
Yeah, great question. The world is definitely changing with regard to some people working totally remote, some people being hybrid, and some people being totally in person in the office. Now, I could share a little bit about what our team has done. We already have some team members who are actually already remote and distributed across the globe. So I feel as a manager that we've done a pretty good job of improving our hybrid work culture. We have a team agreement that outlines how team meetings should be run. So for example, every meeting has to have a Teams call so folks who are remote can join. We have a policy around using the hand raise feature in Teams when you're asking questions or want to speak so that we don't talk over each other or people don't feel silenced. And we have a very strong culture of writing in the team. So we try and send meeting minutes and agendas as much as possible. And, you know, if you were to join the team, I would love to see how you can integrate to our hybrid culture, any inputs that you can have on how we can improve the experience. We treat it as something that, you know, isn't static. We're always learning how to be better hybrid employees and improving that. So remote is welcome, and we will try our best to accommodate folks who are remote and take any input that you have on the remote work experience.
That's awesome. That really sounds like a great cultural fit for me there. I also think that, you know, good documentation and having ways for folks to respond asynchronously are also a couple of ways that we can improve that culture and make sure that we are all, including everybody's voices. So
good note.
It's been great. I love hearing about the culture in your team, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, that was pretty good, Orko. I will say you might just be hired. Heading back into our build presentation, do you want to share a little bit of the key takeaways for this interview walkthrough that we just did as the interviewee?
Yeah. First of all, I got to say, I was just about as nervous doing this interview as I was when I was doing that first interview I did with Microsoft 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, Safia, you actually touched upon quite a few of those really big key takeaways around, you know, asking the questions and communicating. You know, the interviewing itself, that process is very much collaborative. It's not all about just going down there, rushing through the problem and writing that code. It really is about that process. And I hope through this demo, we were able to showcase some of those things, you know. We started off with something that's not so optimal, and that's okay, because it actually really takes the interviewer through your process of problem solving, that you try to first come up with a solution and then try to optimize it. Instead of, you know, getting stuck on figuring out the best solution right away. And that also allows the interviewers some time to understand your thought process, your problem solving skills as well. So be willing to ask those questions, show curiosity, and really also listen. Because if you kind of recall at the end of it, because I was listening to Safia talk about her culture and to sort of mention that, hey, Orko, when you join the team, you might be able to do something more to improve the inclusivity culture, I was able to kind of point out that, oh, hey, we can do some documentation and other things to improve it, right? I could suggest some stuff. And that also kind of goes in the interviewer's head and said, okay, this person really listened for the cue and actually contributed something to that conversation, right? So that's really the big deal. And I would say, again, you've probably heard us both say this, but the key meta point, through all of this process really is you got to communicate. Even if you think that you're not quite in that phase where you're not really getting to the problem yet, communicate. Tell the interviewer what's going on in your head, what you're sort of thinking about, what approach you're taking, so that they can really understand. Maybe they'll give you some hints. You'll be able to figure it out together. So yes, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sophia.
Yeah, so if you're wondering how you can take in all of these learnings that Orko and I have shared throughout the presentation, you can check out some of the positions that are available at Microsoft for student candidates by going to microsoft.com/university. But here's the thing, everything we shared here, this is generally applicable throughout the industry. So wherever you want to go interview, and we do hope it's Microsoft, you are welcome to take these learnings, and you will find that they are effective at every organization that you go to. These are generally valuable skills for any software engineer to have. Now, with that in mind, I'm sure that you have a lot of questions to ask us about tackling technical interviews in general. We are really excited to answer them for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join our session. We hope that it was really valuable and insightful, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and questions.
Thank you so much, Sophia and Orko, for that amazing session. I'm really excited, and I perhaps thought that the interviewers would be kind of scary and everything, but just hearing from both of you, it's been really, really welcoming.
Exactly. Very insightful.
And hey, we've got loads and loads of questions from the audience, so keep them coming. But hey, the first question, I'm going to direct this to you, Orko. You were going through the mock interview and you chose a programming language. Is it customary? Do you have to sort of think that there's a specific language that should be used for this company, since Microsoft uses .NET, C#, or can someone use their own language of choice? For example, maybe they want to use JavaScript.
Totally. So yeah, I think that's one thing that we were trying to point out with Sophia mentioning that, hey, you don't have to necessarily choose C# or TypeScript or specific languages that a lot of Microsoft folks use. Most of the teams, if not all, do tend to be language agnostic. There might be some teams, say for example, in machine learning, where a certain library is what's being used, and those particular things, they're looking for somebody with specific experience around that. But those things you will learn about in the job description itself. But generally, otherwise, we want the interviewer to bring their best, most authentic self to the interview. So to that end, the interviewers themselves will try to accommodate you as much as possible. If we don't understand a particular syntax, we'll ask you, but that means you get to choose the language that you feel comfortable with, so that you can present your best self to us.
Awesome. That actually probably clears up a lot of confusion for people in the audience and even for myself. We've got another question here. Is it common for the coding part to be, will I be expected to test to make sure it runs, or is it more common to see processes where I'm just sort of writing and explaining my code as I go and not necessarily have to worry about testing when it comes to the technical interview part?
Yeah, I can take that. You generally do want to get to a position where you're at least able to test your implementation, if anything, to actually show that what you wrote works and solves the problem. Now, depending on how long it took you to write out your solution, you might find yourself at the very end of the interview, and maybe there's not enough time to go through and do what Orko and I did, where we were, testing against bad inputs and kind of optimizing it, things like that. But you generally want to work towards a goal where you're able to run your program. If you don't get there, that's totally fine, because as we mentioned, it's the process that matters. So in that case, make sure that work of implementing your solution all the way up to it, the final work, is something that allows you to showcase your best self. And you'll find that, when Orko and I did the demo, We had the little bit of television magic where Orko copy pasted the solution just to save us time. But you'll find that in reality, as you're doing these technical interviews, you're writing little bits and pieces of code. So maybe you write a function, or maybe you write a little bit of logic and then you test that. So it's kind of a more incremental approach when you're actually doing the solution end to end instead of using television magic to copy and paste it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, make sure when you're doing these interviews that you're not copying and pasting it. This is just for demo purposes, of course.
Yeah.
And hey, if we can't copy and paste, what would you recommend are some good resources people can go ahead and use to practice?
Yeah, so I shared a little bit about this in my own interview experience, and I would love to see what resources you used, Orko too. But I went on LeetCode and found some programming problems. Cracking the Technical Interview or Code Interview is a very popular book that lots of people use. There were like lots of copies at my university library, and you can find it in bookstores and libraries pretty readily. So there's books, there's lots of online websites. If you Google like programming interview questions, there's like hundreds and thousands of them. I worked through them, on my little notebook. I would just write out solutions and things like that. So those resources, online resources and books are great ones to leverage.
I'm just going to add there what Sophia was mentioning real quickly that she mentioned about practice at the very beginning. So that you will have a ton of resources that you're going to go through, but make sure that when you get a problem, you actually try to solve it out. You actually try to type it in, because it's one thing to solve in your mind, and then it's a slightly different thing when you're in front of an interviewer and actually trying to turn it out into code. So definitely any problem that you come across, take the time to actually write out the code as you would want to be. And that practice will be invaluable when you actually come in to do the interview.
Mm-hmm. There's that classic saying that practice makes perfect, and like the technical interview isn't exempt from that. We have someone who's curious if the concept of personal or professional references is obsolete during the hiring process. Any insight on that?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, I don't think it's honestly it is at the end of the day in the interviews that we have. I think that's a good thing about our industry, perhaps, that like you have these interviews and you can bring your best self forward and you can talk about your resume, you can talk about other cool personal projects that you have done and show what you have as a what do you bring to the table. And most in cases, that's what is what really matters. So I haven't personally, as a hiring manager, I'm not looking so much for personal references or anything of that sort. We do a lot of interviews in sort of hiring events where, in fact, we put in sort of that we do it in a way that we don't bias each other's interview experiences. So I don't know what another interviewer has seen or what their particular feedback is until I put in my own feedback to specifically make sure that I'm not biased by somebody else's feedback. Because, as I said, one of the interviews could go bad, but that shouldn't affect all the other interviews. So we put in those checks and balances there to kind of make sure that we are evaluating the candidate for who they are and what they have done, as opposed to any of the outside factors.
Great. And hey, I noticed that we're sort of wearing, some casual clothing. I've got a hat on, I've got a hoodie. And hey, would I be okay to wear this to an interview, or should I be wearing something like a suit or something like that? Sophia, what do you?
It's best to just wear whatever you are most comfortable in. Obviously, we want you to be comfortable during the interview. So, professional, but most importantly, something that's comfortable and allows you to be your best self.
I will say, against my recruiter's best laid advice, I did wear a suit to my interview, and I was the only person there in a suit. So, as Sophia said, be professional, but you don't need to wear a suit. That's not generally what we're looking for.
Yeah, important thing to keep in mind, whatever makes you feel a little bit more comfortable will probably increase your confidence as well. We have a question here we know the session was about the interview itself, but do you have perhaps any tips on how to even get to the interview stage?
Oh, that is a good one. So I can share from my own experience. At Microsoft, I actually came in through a referral. So I think my experience was a little bit different. But since I've joined the company and I have been in situations where I've interviewed people, I've had folks who have come in through professional conferences. So sometimes at universities, there will be professional kind of clubs like NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. I think SHAPE is another one. SWE, Society of Women Engineers, all sorts of different groups you can join that host conferences that you can attend. And typically, recruiters will go out to those conferences. So those are great avenues to go to as well. Twitter is another great place, believe it or not. A lot of the tech community is active on Twitter, and you'll find that you can find hiring managers will send out tweets, hey, I'm hiring for this position if anyone wants to apply. And so Twitter is a great resource for those as well. So I think conferences and Twitter, and I like those personally because they're a little bit more personable than just filling out a job posting. On Twitter, you can actually interact with the person who posted the link to the job and say, hey, sounds cool. What does your team do? And kind of get that personal engagement. And of course, at a conference, you can actually speak with the recruiter. So those are the two that come to mind. Orko, I don't know if you have any other good places to source for jobs to apply to.
I think you covered all of those. The only other thing that I might mention is, sometimes specific groups and all within Microsoft or any other companies would have blogs and all where you might be able to engage with folks, learn more about. I think a lot of the times people will post certain positions there that you might be able to learn from, and you might also be able to interact with some of the folks there, right? So all of that kind of does give, can help you get that foot in to get that interview. And then beyond that, in the interview itself, it's however you perform.
Awesome. Thank you. And hey, we have another question from the chat, and it's a bit of a in-depth question over here. So they're using the terminology APIs. So for those who don't know what APIs are, they're like application programmable interfaces where you can call another program someone else on the internet has made beforehand. So the question here is it okay you could use these APIs, these application programmable interfaces in an interview? Is that possible?
Yeah. So I think I'll answer that, and Safia, maybe you can add some there as well. Yeah, it kind of goes along to that line of that the fact that we ask you to choose whichever language you prefer to work in, right? So to that end, if you were to choose some language that I wasn't personally really well versed in, pretty much anything would seem a bit alien to me, something that I would need information about, right? So yeah, you can use somebody else's code, some API that you have learned. I would say again, like, do not copy and paste a solution in, but feel free to tell the interviewer, hey, I learned of this particular thing that helps me, switch strings around, and I've learned about this API that I want to use. Feel free to use that. Be ready to explain what happens in that. And a lot of the times, what might also happen is that the interviewer might ask, okay, I understand that you're using this API. Can you tell me what's happening underneath it? So it's important to be able to be explain that, be aware of the implementation of it. Some folks might even say that, okay, you know what, I understand that API does it for you, but you might have to, why don't you show me how this API might be doing things underneath it? So have a good grasp of that particular API if you're going to use it. Safia, anything to add there?
Yeah, one thing I'll add is that depending on the question that I am posing, if let's say someone is using Python and a big part of the question involves implementing a sorting algorithm, and they say, hey, I'm just going to use the sort method in Python. I might let them start there, but one of the things I will do is say, okay, well, let's say you can't use this API. What can you implement your own sort implementation? So that's a long way of saying, if the API that you're using or that built-in method that you're using is doing too much work for you in that problem, if it's not allowing me to see you actually solve the problem or show your creativity or approach, I would actually ask you to implement out yourself instead of just using that built-in library or that external API.
Awesome. Well, we are at the end of the session. We have tons more questions, but to the chat, I'm going to invite you to check out all the resources that Orko and Safia have shared in this session. thank you so much. There was so much great things here. And I think
Yeah.
even for us, we learned a lot here too. That is the end of this session, but we're going to have so much more here at Intro to Tech Skills. So stay tuned. We will be right back for you. And to our speakers, thank you so much. We'll see you
Thank you
soon.
very
Yeah,
much.
thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.